They delivered the litter to my mess hall before their eyes had even opened. That is not how it is supposed to work, and I said so, more than once, to more people than cared to listen. New litters go to the whelping wing. 4 weeks under warm lamps, a proper handler, a feeding schedule written up by someone with a medical certificate. But Quartermaster Ansel Drode had a theory about hardening, and Fenmark Garrison was short 2 handlers that season, and I ran the kitchen, so the crate came to me instead. Packed in straw, 3 of them, damp and blind, and each one smaller than my 2 fists put together. Drode stood in my doorway while his men set the crate down on my prep table, right next to where I'd been rolling dough. Minimal handling, he told me. No affection, no coddling. We want scouts, Holt, not pets. Feed them on the schedule, keep your hands to yourself, and in 6 weeks I'll have them moved to proper kennels. I told him that sounded like a fine plan for someone who wasn't me. Then I went back to my dough, and he left, and the crate sat there making small wet sounds until I couldn't stand it anymore and looked in. 3 cubs, Kethra cats, the tawny, dark rosetted kind they breed for scout work out past the ridge stations, meant to grow into something that can run 20 miles at night and come back without a sound. Right then they were about the size of loaves, all ribs and blind stumbling, and one of them had gotten itself wedged in the corner of the crate and was making a thin, furious little noise about it. I didn't have a feeding schedule. I had a kitchen, so I tore up some bread, soaked it soft in warm broth off the evening stock, and let them work it off my fingers one at a time while I finished the dough with my other hand. It wasn't affection. It was Tuesday. I had bread to make and 3 animals in my kitchen that needed to eat, and warm broth was faster than anything Drode's manual would have called for. I did that every night for 6 weeks, because 6 weeks came and went, and nobody ever showed up to move the kennels. Drode's manual had a name for every stage of it. Phase 1 was isolation conditioning. Phase 2 was scarcity calibration. Phase 3, the one he was proudest of, was silence discipline. Nobody talked to the animals at all, on the theory that a scout who'd never learned comfort would never miss it in the field. I read the manual once, standing at my counter with flour on my hands, and went back to soaking bread, because I had never in 40 years of soldiering met a good scout who didn't know what warm meant. You send something out cold, it comes back cold, or it doesn't come back. So I talked to them, told them about the stock, about the weather, about nothing in particular, the way you talk to anything small enough to need the sound of a voice more than the words in it. Rook leaned into it hardest, pressing his skull flat against my shin like he was chasing the sound. By the 4th week, all 3 had stopped flinching at the kitchen door swinging shut. By the 5th, Cinder had worked out how to unlatch the bread box, and I had to start weighting the lid. By the 2nd month, they had names, because you cannot run a kitchen with 3 animals underfoot and call them Unit 1 with a straight face. Rook was the one who'd wedged himself in the crate corner, biggest of the 3, slowest to trust, first to fall asleep against my boot every night without fail. Cinder was the one who stole. Marl was the quiet one who watched the door. By the 3rd month, the whole garrison knew where the litter actually was, and Drode's hardening program had become the sort of thing men mentioned with their eyebrows up. His training reports called for controlled deprivation, structured isolation, a diet calibrated to keep them lean and wanting. What actually happened was 3 cubs who slept in a pile against a cook's shins every night, and answered to bread and broth before they answered to their own designations. Somebody, I never found out who, and I never much tried, wrote it up on the duty board as a joke. The broth bond directive, effective immediately. Subsection, soak it soft, don't rush them, sit down while you do it. Half the kitchen staff thought it was funny. The other half started doing it themselves, on nights I was off shift, because it worked and because by then even the men who'd laughed at me had watched Rook stand between a swinging door and a junior cook who'd startled him, and had gone quiet about it. By the 6th month, it wasn't a joke that stayed on the duty board. Cooks from other messes started spending their off-duty hours on my floor, letting a cub work soaked bread off their fingers, because word had gotten around that whatever I was doing was the only thing about that litter actually taking. Drode's reports kept insisting otherwise. He logged weight gains, muscle density, response times to combat stimuli, and every number was real. The cats were getting fast, mean when they needed to be, exactly the way a scout should. What his columns had no place for was who they turned to look for first when a door slammed too loud, or whose name, not their designation, they answered to when it mattered. Drode did not find it funny. Drode found it insubordinate. He came to collect them himself in the 9th month. On the same afternoon, a fleet inspector was touring the garrison. A woman named UL Cassette, there to sign off on Fenmark's scout program before headquarters would fund another year of it. Good timing for Drode, bad timing for everyone else. I remember the mess hall was full when he walked in with 2 handlers and a transport crate that was much too small for what the litter had become. Rook alone came up past my belt now, shoulders like a plow ox, the softness long since burned off into muscle the way it does with cats that age fast and hard. He was still the one who fell asleep against my boot. He was also, by any honest measure, no longer something a man wanted to put a hand on without being asked. 6 months overdue, Drode said, loud enough for the inspector to hear. This is exactly the kind of soft handling I warned Command about. Sentiment ruins a working animal, Holt. I'll take it from here. He reached past me for the transport crate's latch, and when I didn't step aside fast enough for his liking, he put a hand flat on my chest and shoved. It wasn't hard. It didn't need to be. Rook was between us before Drode's hand finished the motion, not lunging, not snarling, just simply there. A wall of tawny muscle, head lowered, eyes on Drode's hand like it was the only object left in the room. Cinder came off the bench she'd been sprawled on and took up the other side without a sound. Marl didn't move from the doorway he'd been watching, which was somehow worse, because it meant nobody was getting past him either. Drode went very still. To his credit, he didn't try the hand again. Easy, I said. To Rook, not to Drode. Just that. The word I'd been saying to him since he was small enough to fit in one palm. Rook's ears came forward. He didn't move off the spot, but the readiness went out of his shoulders, the way it does when a soldier stands down without actually standing anywhere else. Cinder settled back onto the bench. Marl kept watching the door, because that was his job now and had been for months, whether anyone had assigned it to him or not. Inspector Cassette hadn't said a word through any of it. She was watching the cats, not the men, which told me plenty about why headquarters kept sending her. Quartermaster, she said finally. Your report describes these 3 as unsocialized and combat conditioned through structured deprivation. She nodded at Rook, still planted between Drode and the man he'd been about to manhandle. Would you like to revise that, or should I just note what I watched happen? Drode had nothing that would fit in his mouth right then. I watched him understand it in real time, that 6 weeks of a written protocol had lost to 6 months of warm bread, in front of the one person whose signature actually mattered, and that there was no version of the next 30 seconds where he came out of it looking like a man who'd been right. Note what you watched, he said, and left, and did not take the crate. Cassette stayed another hour. She ate at my table, with 3 overgrown cats arranged around her boots like she'd been assigned to them at birth, and she asked me, not unkindly, what my training method actually was. Feed them something warm, I told her. Sit down while you do it, don't rush them. That's the whole directive. She wrote it down like it was a real answer, because by then it was. Rook still falls asleep against my boot most nights, though these days that means half the bench goes with him, and I've learned to eat standing up on the nights he claims the seat first. Fenmark got its funding. Drode got reassigned somewhere with a better filing system and no cats, and the duty board still reads the Broth bond directive, effective immediately, not as a joke anymore, but as the only piece of doctrine on that whole base that 3 grown Kethra cats have ever once obeyed.